industry was falling apart. And there were calls in the business press to reindustrialize America. Well, how do you do that? You do it by keeping out superior Japanese products, and increasingly South Korean products, and by calling on the usual savior, namely the Pentagon. That's happened before, like a century earlier. The biggest operation and business operation in the United States was railroads. It was beyond the competence of private industry, so the Pentagon took it over. It wasn't called the Pentagon then. The U.S. Army took it over and had the organizing capacity and the funds and so on. And that's often happened. Happened again with Regan. Called on the Pentagon to design what they called the factory of the future, a modern factory. This would teach backward American corporate managers how to use computers, to use on-time production and all the fancy techniques that the Japanese had invented. This has many advantages, calling on the Pentagon. For one thing, they can design the factory of the future so that it empowers managers and de-skills workers. That's been pretty well studied. David Noble, who was on the faculty of MIT, now in Canada, did major work on this, particularly with regard to automation, and showed that under military auspices, automation was designed so as to ensure that decisions were taken away from the skilled mechanics and put in the hands of supervisors and managers to de-skill the workforce and empower management. There was no reason of efficiency or even profit. In fact, the studies showed that it would often harm profit, but it didn't matter. It's very important for a class war to ensure that the working class is de-skilled and passive, and that power lies in the hands of managers and supervisors. There's nothing new about that either. I'm sure you've all heard of Taylorism, the system that was introduced about a century ago, essentially to turn working people into robots, in effect, control every motion, make sure that everything's maximally efficient and so on. That was designed in U.S. Military production, armories and so on. That gives you plenty of funding to do whatever you like, no controls, no constraints. You can implement class war very efficiently. And it goes right through history, but the Reaganites, Reagan probably didn't know what was going on, but his administration broke new records in this. Take democracy and development. The two concepts are closely related in many respects. One respect is that they have a common enemy. The common enemy is loss of sovereignty. In a world of nation states, it's true by definition that decline of sovereignty leads to decline of democracy, nothing to debate, and decline in the ability to conduct economic and social policy. And that, in turn, harms development. That's a conclusion that's very well confirmed by several centuries of economic history. And that same economic history shows quite consistently that loss of sovereignty leads to imposed liberalization. Imposed, of course, in the interest of the designers, not the subjects. In recent years, the imposed regime is commonly called neoliberalism. That's the reigning economic orthodoxy of the past several decades. It's not a very good term, incidentally. The socioeconomic regime is by no means new, and it's not liberal, at least in the sense of liberal understood by classical liberals, Adam Smith and others. With those provisos, it's fair to say that a common enemy of democracy and development in the modern period is neoliberalism, although it has earlier guises. As I mentioned, it's obvious in the case of democracy. In fact, the very design of neoliberal principles is a direct attack on democracy. So it takes a privatization. Well, true by definition that that's an attack on democracy. You take something out of the public domain, put it into the hands of totalitarian systems, which is what corporations are, unaccountable totalitarian systems. Obviously, that reduces democracy. When you move on to the current primary theme, what's called trade and services. Trade and services means privatization of services. It has nothing to do with trade, privatization of services. It's called trade so they can fit it into the trade agreement, general agreement on trade and services. But it just means selling off services. What are services? Well, in brief, services are anything that a human being could be interested in. Education, health, water, pretty soon it'll be air, whatever it may be, energy. Anything that a person could be interested in is what's called services. Trade and services means putting all of these into the hands of unaccountable totalitarian institutions. If that is achieved, to the extent that that's achieved, you can have formal democracy quite openly, clean elections, count the ballots properly, etc. But it doesn't matter because there's nothing for people to have any decisions about. Nothing that matters, at least. It's all somewhere else in the hands of unaccountable tyrannies. So that goes under the name the General Agreement on Trade and Services. That's the leading theme of the current trade negotiations. Another component of the neoliberal package is financial liberalization. Means governments, for example, can't control capital flight. Currencies aren't regulated and so on. It's very well understood by economists what that leads to. Financial liberalization creates what some international economists have called a virtual senate of investors and lenders who carry out a moment-by-moment referendum on economic policies. And if they don't like those policies, they destroy the economy by capital flight, by attacks on currencies, by selling bonds, and so on. And there are policies that the virtual Senate doesn't like. Anything that is irrational. Irrational means it's helpful to people, not to profits. And the virtual Senate keeps an eye on this second by second. And if a government makes the mistake of being irrational, feels it very quickly. Huge capital flight, tax on bonds happens all the time, and it keeps the countries in line. It means that governments have what's sometimes called a dual constituency, two constituencies. One of them is the voters, the other is the virtual Senate, and you can guess who wins. All of this is coming to a head right now in the what are called the free trade negotiations, which have practically nothing to do with free trade. There was what was called the Doha round, which didn't work. Poor countries, the so-called developing countries, that's a euphemism for the former colonial countries that are trying to escape from the grip of imperial violence and destruction. They're called developing countries, whether they're developing or not. They blocked the Doha round, and it's now coming up again. In the West, among the rich, it's considered a kind of no-brainer. Of course, we have to implement the Doha round. We have to bring it to a successful conclusion. Popular opinion is generally opposed, usually strongly opposed, in the rich countries too, and that's no surprise. If you look at the proposals, which are usually kind of in secret, people aren't supposed to look at them, but if you look at them, they provide great benefits for investors, for lenders, for management, who are freed up to set working people against one another all over the world. It's called globalization. Its main theme is set working people against one another, so that it'll naturally follow that wages are lowered, benefits decline.